It was early 2020, and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it, and their commute to work was long, so they moved out and the house was inhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my place of work, around 45 minutes. And my sister pretty much rented it to me for free. I just paid for water and electricity and looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 or 3 months and had already gotten used to it. One night, after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards the door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down, picked it up thinking it might have been one of mine since I was a smoker, but after looking at the brand name, I realized it wasn't mine and threw it away. I didn't think much of it and just shrugged it off as someone throwing it on my curb. I went on with my night and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts. This time near my porch. Needless to say, I was pissed off and thought someone sat on my porch and smoked, but since I didn't know who it was, there was nothing I could do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night I was watching a movie on my laptop, and it was pretty late, past 1 a.m. So I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood, and it was COVID time, so people rarely ventured out at night, and I didn't think much of it. Around half an hour later, I was surprised when I heard chatting nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about, as the voices seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two approaching my porch and reduced their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my front door and waited, expecting a loud bang, or the knob being shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to my window to see if they had walked away or changed their minds. My windows have bars from the inside out, so you would have to unlock them if you wanted to move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback. Leaning up against a window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically studded over his own steps as he jumped back. He tightened his hood over to cover his face, so all I could see was this big blue eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked the door a solid 4 or 5 times, and it wouldn't budge. All the while, I was staring at them, frozen in fear, and trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over the window, locking them and running upstairs to the storage room, where I pushed a table up against the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars of the windows being shaken aggressively. When they realized they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long, angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. By the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't too keen on staying there, so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar has happened since. This happened to me a few years ago. In January, I was at a movie theater and got my backpack stolen. It had a spare key to my apartment in it. It also had an old credit card statement with my address. Fast forward to September, and I wanted to watch the movie Joker, but I'm stuck at work on a Friday night and it's too late to watch it. So I reluctantly went home, and it was around 10 p.m., and I'm watching Dateline NBC about someone being murdered. I'm not really paying attention to it, but I hear someone walking outside, closer towards my apartment, and they're dragging something heavy. Then I hear the storm door open, so I'm confused, but I assumed it must have been my landlord. But I didn't understand what he would want at 10 p.m. I expected a knock at the door, but I didn't hear a knock. Instead, I heard a key insert into the lock and the doorknob turn. Fortunately, I had my landlord replace the key 2 days after my backpack was stolen. The key obviously didn't work, and I heard them quickly run away after they discovered it was the wrong key. I was hiking across Newfoundland, following an old railway that was long ago disassembled and turned into a giant trail, and sleeping wherever I found myself at night. One day, I ran into a small cottage town, except everything was abandoned. It was creepy, but interesting at the same time. The sun was waning, so I decided to set up camp in a mostly empty lot that had an abandoned truck slowly falling into a ravine near it. I cooked up some food and crawled into my tent to sleep. I woke up sometime in the night and I heard footsteps outside my tent. At first I thought it was an animal, but the steps sounded more like a human walking. The steps got closer and went around my tent. I slowly and quietly pull out my knife, and if he tries to get in, my plan is to stab first and ask questions later. Anyone trying to get into my tent at night in the middle of nowhere is looking to do some kind of harm. My heart was racing at this point, but I tried to stay quiet. Luckily, the steps started moving away from the tent until I couldn't hear them anymore. I wait a bit to see if they'll come back, but I didn't hear anything. I slowly got out of my tent, and I didn't see anything. Without turning on my flashlight, I quickly took everything down and stuffed it into my bag. After that, I started walking down the trail to get the hell out of there. I walked until daytime and came across a road and flagged down a truck. The guy was nice and drove me into town where I got a hotel. The creepy thing, when I think back to it, was whoever that was likely watched me walk into town from one of the abandoned structures. I'd like to say that I think he was just curious, but I'm glad I didn't stay and wait to see if he'd come back.